Welcome back into Sikkim 365 Radio. Paul, Catalina, and JD Piquel. Don't worry, we still love each other.
Absolutely.
We're never going to agree on this playoff thing.
Yeah, it's all right, though.
Yeah.
It's all right. It's going to happen, too. I'm very aware it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to expand.
And Joey Kaufman, Columbus Dispatch, joins us now. And Joey, we'll talk Ohio State in a second, especially, people in Texas really want to know about Quinn Ewers and what's going on with him up there. But this Big Ten, Pac12, ACC alliance, how do you see that really shaking out beyond scheduling, which on the surface that is? How does that work out for all three of these conferences on at least the first step?
I guess you'll have to forgive me for my ignorance, but I'm still a little unclear on what the alliance will actually mean. They've talked about maybe having some political agreement, voting in the same block for governance structure related to college sports. They've talked about maybe a loose scheduling alliance, but the Big Ten and Pac-12 already play each other at a conference. Ohio State's playing Oregon this year at the Horseshoe. So I'm a little bit in wait-and-see mode for what this alliance actually means going forward, because to me the details seem a little murky.
Yeah, they are very murky, and outside of maybe the fact that you would get Clemson playing USC or something like that, I don't know, outside, again, like you mentioned, the voting block, what the huge benefit would be.
Yeah, they've to me, I think what you could do maybe is ensure some higher quality matchups in a scheduling alliance where, there have been some years where Ohio State has played Oregon State as the Pac-12 team. That's not really going to juice up your television ratings, but I think there could be a scenario where if I was just a hypothetical commissioner or somebody in administrative shoes, where you maybe have your number one team from the Pac-12 play the number one team from the Big Ten from the previous year to ensure some high quality matchups, maybe a little bit. Maybe that would help out a little bit, because that seems to be what you're shooting for, right? In some ways, the SEC has concentrated a lot of the best programs in its conference, and you want to make sure if you're Ohio State, if you're Clemson, you are playing teams of that same caliber. It's not just the JV and the varsity.
Yeah, and you can't really concentrate teams anymore. There's not that many teams to really concentrate into a conference that you can do it. Like, you can't really. The SEC's done what they've done, right? Like, they've got all these brand name teams. They're not a whole bunch more sitting out just available to be plucked off of trees. Otherwise, we would have already seen that happen.
Right, unless the Big Ten were all of a sudden going to look at the Pac-12 and decide, hey, maybe we want to expand out west. And I think that scenario is unlikely. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 have always had a pretty good relationship, and that's why I think the scheduling alliance or an alliance of some form makes some sense, because I don't know if the Big Ten is quite like the SEC in terms of their aggression from a business and revenue point of view. I think the Big Ten has been collegial with the Pac-12 and has a long-standing tradition with them. So I think a scenario in which the Big Ten would be rating the Pac-12 to try to maybe have some grouping of the USC and UCLA and Washington and Oregon coming into the league seems a little far-fetched. So this seems to be more to the liking of the Big Ten, just based on everything, how they've kind of operated in the past.
Yeah, Joey, what's the immediate reaction out of Ohio State country? Because I'm thinking in terms of how much this matters to teams in the Big Ten, I would have to think Ohio State's probably on the outskirts of it mattering to them a ton. If they handle business, they're going to be just fine. What's the pulse right now in Columbus?
Yeah, I don't think this really is on a lot of Ohio State fans' radar all that much. I think Ohio State fans are pretty happy with the state of their program. They're pretty happy with having a playoff team, and they are the heavy favorites again in the Big Ten. And just about every year they're on pace to make the college football playoff. And if expansion happens, you're going to be hard pressed to ever see Ohio State miss the playoff. So I think Ohio State fans feel pretty good, and there's realignment going on, but I don't see it really affecting what most people in Columbus care about, which is Ohio State winning a national championship.
Well, they're certainly one of the leading contenders this year, Joey, to do that. I guess the biggest questions, same thing. Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State all have new quarterbacks this year, and Ohio State's probably C.J. Stroud, right? Or is there still some competition there?
I think at this point it's a pretty safe bet to say C.J. Stroud's going to be Ohio State's starting quarterback when they open their season against Minnesota here in a little under 2 weeks. He was tapped as the front runner. Ryan Day designated him as officially the favorite to win the job earlier this week. He said there had been some separation between him and Jack Miller and Kyle McCord, two other freshmen he's been competing with for the starting job. And they also gave him a rest day on Wednesday. And if you were in a tight quarterback battle, you would not think you would be giving the front runner a rest day in the middle of training camp. So I think that goes to show that it's really Stroud's job to lose at this point if he hasn't won it already.
Yeah, when do you expect him to be announced as the guy? Will that be they trot out against Minnesota first series, like, all right, we got number 7 out there? Or is he going to be the starter well before that?
I think they'll announce him next week or at some point before game time. Typically, the way Ryan Day has handled this situation, the way Ohio State has handled it in the past, they haven't gone with maybe the tack of Jim Harbaugh or some of the other coaches who will tell you, we're going to announce the starting quarterback at the 15-minute mark of the first quarter of the first game. They haven't done that as much. They've tended to maybe 10 days out before an opener pick a guy and really kind of make him the face of the program. So I would expect them to do something similar in this circumstance.
All right, so a lot of talk in the state of Texas has been about Quinn Ewers, the quarterback from South Lake Carroll, who skipped his senior year of high school, is enrolled early, is selling kombucha and practicing now with Ohio State. Obviously, don't expect him to play. What's Ohio State's and the fan base's reaction been to this about getting him there earlier?
I think most people are excited about it. I think there's actually some portion of the fan base who's maybe not fully ready for everything that NIL is going to bring. It certainly creates a new dynamic, and it has the potential to create drama, because if CJ Stroud were to struggle at some point during the season, there will probably be a segment of the fan base that is hoping or wanting Quinn Ewers to come in and maybe get a shot, but right now, because of the timing of everything that happened, Quinn Ewers didn't arrive on campus until last weekend. He first practiced with the team on Monday. He's only had 5 practices now under his belt, and when we were out there watching this week, he wasn't getting any reps in team period, and he was pretty much limited to individual drills, and they're bringing him along pretty slowly. He's still learning the playbook, so I think it's going to be pretty challenging for him to get up to speed and really see meaningful playing time this season, barring some injury or a really strange circumstance with the quarterback, just because he doesn't know the offense. If he came in maybe the beginning of training camp, or if he came in July and you maybe had some meetings and a little bit more of a period of time to ramp up toward a season, he would have a shot. But he came in really less than 3 weeks before the season opener, and I think that's a really tall order for him.
Yeah, Joey, what's been the reaction among the coaching staff? Because I'm thinking, okay, we thought we had this guy next year. He'll come along, maybe redshirt or compete to play next year, depending on what C.J. Stroud does this year. But his clock has started now. He now is on the 5-to-play-4 track, and that's already in motion. Was there any at all sense of, gosh, this kind of messed with our timeline a little bit here?
I think a little bit, maybe you could say that. They haven't certainly publicly come out and said that by any means. But I don't think Ohio State really had any choice in the matter but to say, come to Columbus, because certainly if you were to push back or say, can you wait a year, and there's a chance you lose him as a commit. And I think that's a little bit of the strange situation they get put in. So at this point, if you want Quinn Ewers to come, you kind of got to take him when he's ready. And I think certainly it maybe has the potential to add a weird dynamic later in the season. Certainly, as I kind of mentioned before, if Stroud struggles. So it might be easier from a locker room chemistry situation if he didn't come now. But, I mean, there's a very good chance C.J. Stroud ends up being really good, because basically every quarterback that Ohio State has had with Ryan Day has been really good. And if C.J. Stroud ends up living up to the billing, I think there's a very good chance that Quinn Ewers becomes more of a non-story later in the year.
Yeah, he hasn't whiffed yet. He hasn't whiffed. He hasn't had one of those that everybody thought was going to be good and then hits the wall. So, yeah, that's a great point, Joey. So, schedule-wise, Minnesota to open up, Oregon. They're Their schedule's it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it does seem to line up for them pretty well to roll through like they have. Is there any games that you think are bad matchups for them or trap games down the line, just looking out before the season starts?
Not really. The unique dynamic, I think, to their season is just that it's really front-loaded. Typically, Ohio State might play a MAC school in week 1 or another group of 5 school, and maybe you ease into the season a little more. C.J. Stroud gets to really settle into the offense and get comfortable. But they're going to play at Minnesota, which has a lot of returning starters and a lot of super seniors, which is going to be an interesting dynamic in the Big Ten this year, where Ohio State's going to face an older roster. So I think there isn't really a trap game on the schedule per se, but I think they are going to have to be really ready to play week 1 because there's not much of an easy acclimation period. You play at Minnesota week 1, then you're hosting Oregon, which might be actually the toughest team they play, and Kevin Thibodeau is going to be a challenge for any offensive line in the block this year, and going to be a challenge for any young quarterback who's trying to deal with pressure for the first time. So that's kind of what I'm looking out for. I think this year is can they get through September in those first couple weeks in one piece, and just how do they look coming out of the gate?
Yeah, because, week 1, you mentioned it, Minnesota, really experienced team. Ohio State is obviously Ohio State, but they're going to be playing with a quarterback that's never thrown a pass in a game before. Is there any sense of worry around the Minnesota game, or am I overhyping that?
I wouldn't say it's worry. I think it's more of they will probably, the way the program and players and coaches have talked about it, it's been a little more of a sense of urgency where you're playing a Big Ten team in week 1. You're playing a team that nearly won the Big Ten West 2 years ago. So I don't think there's a super high level of concern or worry, but I think Minnesota has their attention more than if, say, Ohio State was playing Florida Atlantic like they were 2 years ago.
Joey, Does the Big Ten, with this, I'm going to go back to the Alliance real quick. Does the Big Ten, I know that there been coaches in the ACC like Dabo Swinney and Mac Brown that both said that they don't like expanding the playoff and they don't like at least the 12 number. Does the Big Ten feel any sort of way about 12 teams as opposed to maybe 8 or 6?
I think most people in the league are open to 12, and I think most coaches are open to 12. We have seen that from the ACC. Mac Brown and Dabo Swinney both came out and talked about they weren't super jazzed on expansion, but Ryan Day is a proponent of it. He played his college ball at New Hampshire, which is the level of college football that has a playoff and spent time in the NFL. So I think in general he has always been more comfortable with a larger playoff field. And he's also talked about too. Ohio State is, when he was there in 2017 and 2018 as the offensive coordinator for Urban Meyer, dealt with some devastating losses that could knock you out of the playoff, and so they've gone the last 2 years without a loss in the Big Ten. That allowed them to get to the playoff. But I think for Ryan Day, he likes the idea of an expanded playoff. It's going to give them a little more of a cushion where they can withstand a loss or two and still make the playoff. And a lot of other coaches in the league too also would benefit, I think, as well. Penn State's been close to making the 4-team playoff with expanded. James Franklin's had a lot of teams that could make it. Jim Harbaugh's had some teams in Michigan, even in 2016. They probably could have made the playoffs. So I think it's going to allow maybe that second tier in the Big Ten to really have a shot to compete for a national title, because right now it's really hard to unseat Ohio State without and still make the playoff. And now you have a possibility with either a 12-team playoff. Maybe you don't beat Ohio State, but maybe you can still make it in.
Joey Kaufman, Columbus Dispatch. Joey, for years, I call you to do a segment. You always say yes. Always appreciate it. Enjoy the season. We'll talk to you again soon.
And glad we're starting this year in September.
Yeah, me too. Both, yeah. Me too. That's Joey Kaufman, Columbus Dispatch, and he covered USC for a while. Now he's covering Ohio State. He's a guy, JD, I'll tell you, every time I've ever called him. Yep. Be on the show.
Seems awesome.
Yeah,
Seems awesome. I'm glad we got to have him on.
Yeah. All right. So at 5:15, we're going to have Tim Buckley.